I have so many notes. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the recap and review of NCIS Season 16, Episode 13, She. So we start out the episode with this whole underwater sequence with Bishop, and Gibbs is reading this really dramatic voiceover in the background. But before we can figure out literally what on earth is happening, we flash forward to Random Gift Day. Casey is handing out random gifts to everyone, and she gives Vance a pen, and she gives Gibbs a log of wood, and she gives Torres an empty jar, which he does not appreciate very much. The team gets a call that a girl has been found on base alone in a storage unit. When they go to talk to her, they figure out that she has been trapped in a basement her whole life and her mother is still there. They take her to the hospital and she's super overwhelmed, and Bishop is like, well, why don't I stay and talk to her since we already had a connection? And Gibbs is like, no, you need to go in the field. He asks Sloane to stay with her, who I keep wanting to call Maria Menounos. She's definitely not Maria Menounos. They run Lily's DNA and figure out that her mother was already in the system. Her mother was a part of this case 10 years ago where she was sworn into the Navy, but before she could start duty, she was kidnapped and her car was driven off a cliff, and they found remains, but they were too charged, so they just assumed it was her. But she was also pregnant at the time, which is why Lily exists. Also, we never really figure out who the other remains belonged to. So that's unfortunate for them. But anyway, another big element of this case was that it originally belonged to NCIS, but it was turned over to the county sheriff's department against Gibbs' wishes. But now the silver lining, oh, I have a lamp, so there's some fun shadows. Hello. But the important thing is that they now know that Morgan is alive. Bishop and Torres go to investigate the case files to see if they can figure out any more information, and while they're flipping through the folder, they can see that the investigation had continued after it had been closed by the sheriff's department. And so they're flipping through the files and they're trying to figure out who was still investigating, and then some sad, unfortunate Where's Waldo? They see Ziva's reflection in the window, meaning that she had been the one continuing the investigation. So Bishop doesn't want to break this new information to anyone yet, and Torres is like, why? Ziva's dead. Bishop is just saying she's so fed up because no one ever wants to mention Ziva around her because they're afraid Bishop won't live up, which is a conversation I imagine has happened often in the writer's room. She said she wishes she could have met Ziva because there's so much she could have learned from her, and there's this very interesting big sister, little sister dynamic happening that I didn't know I needed, but I really enjoy. A lot of the pictures that were in the file featured Morgan's boyfriend at the time, so Torres and Bishop go to talk to him. When they go to him, he's like, did Ziva David take these? And they find out that she had been following him forever, and then once she cleared him was like, I will find Morgan's kidnapper for you. And the boyfriend also says that he used to take Morgan's mom to Ziva's office every night. And so when they said this, I was like, oh, it's probably that office she was using at the end of season 10. But no, it's a completely different space. It's not her secret lair, it's her secret lair. So Bishop naturally goes to check out Ziva's office, and she goes to this woman that Ziva had been renting the office space from. The woman is very clear about what this location is. She's very aware that it was Ziva David's secret office. For a secret office, Ziva sure seemed to be hosting a lot of get-togethers here. So Bishop goes inside the office, and it's this very nice, well-decorated cabin-like space almost. But then she opens these giant cabinets, and it's full of hundreds of marble notebooks. And then Bishop's like, maybe I should call Gibbs. Back at the hospital, Lily is missing. And by missing, I mean she walked 2 feet down the hallway and hid in a half-open janitor's closet that no one thought to look in. Sloane finds her and she sits next to her, and it's actually this very touching scene. I don't know if this story was supposed to be a big reveal, because I did some research on her character because I'm not super familiar with her. and I didn't see anything about it. Sloane tells this story and it sounds like she had a daughter that she gave up for adoption right after birth. But the whole scene has this theme of mothers loving their daughters so much they send them away to protect them, which is exactly what happened with Ziva and Dolly, but we're just not gonna talk about that right now. Sloane eventually convinces Lily to give her more information, and Lily says that her primary kidnapper was named Robert and that he had an assistant named Buddy. Lily also says that her mom told her to give her her little doll when she got to the police, so she hands it over to Sloane. Speaking of hair, Bishop has bangs now, which I'm sure is not news to any of you, but it's news to me. And what's interesting is she really only has them like half of the time. She'll have bangs most of the time, but then when a situation gets tense, she's like... She also looks distractingly similar to Amanda Seyfried. I just keep waiting for her to burst out into ABBA. It turns out that Morgan had sewn the captor's hair into the doll so they're able to trace them down in the database. And then Palmer performs an autopsy on the doll. My little boy has grown so much since I saw him last. They're able to trace the hair back to Buddy. Buddy's location comes up, so Gibbs and some of the team go to his house, but it turns out that Robert has already killed him. While they're in the house, they hear a noise and Torres just like appears in the doorway and Gibbs is like this close to shooting him, which really would have just stolen the episode. Ziva who? And then Gibbs is like, well, where's Bishop? And Torres is just like, So the whole team shows up at Ziva's office and McGee is reading her fan fiction. It's actually just a very poetic account of when she was rescued in Somalia that just unfortunately reads like it's fresh off a Wattpad. And McGee's just like, boss, I really don't feel comfortable reading this. I wonder why. And they're flipping up her mattress and they find all these guns and knives and Torres is like, I like this woman. It's probably because he's literally Tony. Gibbs is like, well, yeah, Ziva had almost like 20 suspects that she cleared and everyone's like, you knew about this case? He's like, well, yeah. Gibbs is like, I got it, I got the case covered. And Bishop doesn't like that, so she takes Ziva's notebook anyway. And then there's a scene in Autopsy between Bishop and Palmer, and Bishop's talking about something she saw in Ziva's notebooks that was like a messed up idiom and it was about Jimmy. And Bishop's like, I never realized you two were so close. And that's something that I also forget. I always forget how much I enjoyed Ziva and Palmer's relationship. Like, it was very simple, but it was just really sweet. Palmer explains that the reason why Ziva was personally continuing the investigation was because she was the one who turned over the case to the detective. And then Gibbs got really furious at her for it, and Ziva felt personally responsible, so she's the one who went on the hunt. This is a really interesting thing to add to like the NCIS lore, because if you think back to how much Gibbs just hated Ziva when she first got here, this whole storyline about like yet another reason for Gibbs to dislike her and like this pressure that she was feeling and this guilt that she was feeling, I think it just adds another interesting dynamic to her earlier story arc. Bishop's really unsure about reading through the journals, but Palmer tells her if Ziva could see the fire in her eyes, she'd tell her to do it anyway. I'm just really obsessed with Ziva and Bishop now. That's what I'm learning today. And then there's just this really brief scene with Vance and Gibbs in Vance's office. Something about it is just very classic NCIS, and it hits me in like a nostalgic place. And then Vance refers to Ziva as Gibbs's daughter, which... God help us. Sloane introduces Lily to her dad, which Lily's already having like a pretty intense day. I don't know if this was like the next best step. The father convinces Lily to explain to them how she got out, and basically she says that Morgan put burns all over her arm and it made it look like bed bug bites, and so they had to throw the mattress out, and then Lily hid in the mattress. So the team goes to the dump and they find the mattress and it has bird poop on it, and through some bizarrely specific bird website, I digress, they're able to figure out the general locale of where the house would be, and then once they discover Robert's alias, they're able to pinpoint the exact house, which is in the bird poop radius. That's a line. Back at NCIS, Bishop shows Gibbs this notebook, and in the back of it, there's a letter from Morgan's dead mother that Ziva wrote down for her. And Ziva made a promise to Morgan's mother that once they caught Morgan's kidnapper, Ziva would read it to him. Bishop says that once they catch Robert, she's going to follow through on the promise and read it to him. And then Gibbs is like, what's rule number 10? Say it out loud. Like he's trying to get her to admit that she knows he's a vampire or something. But rule number 10 is don't get personally involved in a case. And then Bishop and Gibbs get into this argument where Bishop's like, the reason that you're so upset about this is because you get personally involved in every case that you partake in. And then Gibbs is like, the reason Ziva is dead is because she got so personally involved in all of her cases. Which, I'm like at least 90% sure there were other elements involved, but once again, I digress. And there's this whole thing about how Ziva would get so involved in each of her cases, and yes, like it made her more determined and it made her a better agent, but it also really weighed on her mentally, and the only way that she could cope with that was to write in her journals. While most of the team goes to Robert's house, Bishop gets a lead on where Morgan and Robert truly might be. So Bishop goes to the house where Morgan and Robert are hiding, and she's very calm, but you can tell she means business because the bangs are pushed back. And of course Robert runs with Morgan, and then he knocks her out and pushes her in a lake, and then Bishop dives in to save her, and it ends up being the scene from the beginning. It's the circle of life. The team shows up to the house and arrests Robert. Morgan is reunited with Lily and her boyfriend, and it's gonna be terrible when they have to update her on all the things that happened in the last decade. But the reunion is like really happy. Torres collects water from the lake in his jar for some reason. Back at Gibbs's house, Bishop and him are reading through some of Ziva's notebooks, and he's reading this really powerful entry about how feeling gives her power. And I thought it was going to be something she wrote right before she left for Israel, and like in the mindset of bettering herself. But they say it was something she wrote right when she started this case, like right when she started working at NCIS, which is interesting to consider her already in that mindset. But we'll talk about that later. Gibbs says that after they arrested Robert, he had a heart attack and he's now in the hospital, so if Bishop wants to read him that letter, now is her chance. Bishop walks into the room, letter in hand, and she's like, Robert, I have something to read to you. And Robert's like, yeah, somebody already read it to me. And Bishop is like, who read it to you? And he's like, she said she's gonna haunt my dreams. Seems like we just heard that from somewhere. So Bishop rushes back to Ziva's office, and you can tell she's nervous because... So Bishop goes to the door, but the door is unlocked. And then she goes inside, and everything's moved around. And then she looks at the desk, and there's a letter. And it says, Eleanor Bishop, for the safety of my family, please keep my secret. And then they cut to Bishop, who's just like, I guess I'm in this now too. And that's the episode. Let's talk about it. So the main thing we gather from this episode is that Ziva is probably still alive. You know, that small detail. I went into this episode with very low expectations because it's just such an easy cash grab for them to just advertise Ziva. If ratings are low or a storyline is not thriving, like such an easy get out of jail free card is just to mention Ziva. And so when I saw that promo during the Super Bowl, I was hesitant. Well, I was excited because like I was rolling on the floor, but I was hesitant just because they're very aware that just by like pulling the Ziva card, they can bring back all these people that haven't watched the show in 6 years, and it doesn't necessarily have to have a fulfilling plot line. But I was pleasantly surprised. This was much more than I expected. And I kind of cheated a little bit. I wasn't available to watch this as it aired, so I watched it the next day on CBS's website, and you can kind of like scrub through and just see like still shots from throughout the episode. And I saw towards the end, there was just like a shot of a letter or like a note or something, and I couldn't see what it said, but I was like, wouldn't that be funny if it was like, I'm alive, Ziva. If you're new here, I have an interesting track record of joking about storylines that I think are implausible, and then they happen. And then when they introduced the plot line of like Ziva was supposed to read this note to this guy, I was like, oh, well, that's what the note at the end is going to be, and that's fine. Like, that's a nice button ending. I'm not mad at the story so far. And then when Robert says that somebody already read it to him, my jaw dropped. And I have TMJ, so that's a feat. I actually thought it was a well done episode with a pretty interesting ending. But now we have to deal with the consequences. So before I get into that whole realm, I just want to talk about a few other aspects of the episode. First of all, I really enjoyed the subplot with Morgan and Lily and the father. I just thought it was really touching, and I was invested in all the characters, which is not something you always get with a B plot. Speaking of which, I was not too enthralled in Torres's plotline with the jar. Vaguely reminded me of that Tony plotline where he was like, something is missing from my life, and everyone was like, something is missing from your life. And then 2 episodes later, he had a daughter, so hope Torres has a crib. I like that Ziva wrote out Bishop's full name. Like, it wasn't just Ellie, it wasn't just Bishop, it was Eleanor Bishop, and that has big Ziva energy to me, so I like it. They also played Ziva's theme, which like, I was also pretty fond of the characters that I hadn't met yet. I can't say I know enough about those characters yet to make like a full judgment, but from what I've seen so far, I enjoy them. I really liked Bishop in this episode. I think my initial beef with Bishop was just that they were trying to make us like her right away. Like, I distinctly remember that one episode where she saved a child, which, like, great, lovely, but when she walked into the building, everyone was like standing and like applauding for her, and it was just like a lot. Like, we get it, she's a badass. But I think now she's still like badass, but like she just genuinely does like badass things. And I think she's earned more of that respect now, and I think they found a nice balance for her, from what I can tell, and I enjoy it. I just really love Bishop's relationship with Ziva, which is interesting to evaluate a relationship between 2 people who have never met. Though I do like to imagine Ziva was like in the bushes outside the office waiting to see if Bishop got her letter. The writings don't like shock me. I don't consider them like really out of character for her, especially based on things we learned about her in like seasons 10, 11, 13, which is particularly interesting when you remember she's not in 2 of those seasons. But those seasons revealed that she just had a side of her that felt things very, very deeply. The fact that she had to write to kind of work through those feelings doesn't shock me. The only thing that I was particularly like about was that one writing that they said she wrote at the very beginning of her career, because I think that's a development she didn't necessarily get around to until like season 6 or 7. I feel maybe she misdated it. Maybe she like wrote the date wrong. And that kind of brings me to a whole different discussion, which is what we learned about Ziva after she physically was no longer on the show. You know, you have to think about like how much of that was genuinely Ziva's progression, and then how much of it was to further other characters' storylines or their exits. I get it, but also like once it's in the canon of the show, like what effect does that have on her legacy? It's something very interesting and important to consider, but this video was already on the verge of being alarmingly long, so I'll hold off on that for now. Did I believe she was alive? Yeah, like I always knew it was a strong possibility, and I think most people did. They obviously left it very open-ended by not finding her remains. And then there was that whole line where Tony was like, Ziva loves Paris, that I think was supposed to be like small, but everyone in the world caught on to it. I just didn't expect them to pull it now, because if like mentioning Ziva is like a get out of jail free card, saying that Ziva is alive is like some Willy Wonka golden ticket like, it's a big deal. I'm crossing my fingers that it's not like just like a one and done like throwaway episode, which I doubt. As fun as it would be for Bishop to like take it to her grave, that would be so boring. I really think they have to deal with it. And if you're familiar with how the NCIS season storyline works, usually things they introduce around episode 11, 12, 13 are things that end up coming back in the season finale, which makes me wonder if this is a possible season finale storyline. And I've seen a lot of people echo similar thoughts. That would be a bold choice. They could easily make a whole finale arc out of it, and I believe they can do it well. You know, you just have to be careful and thoughtful, which of course leads to an even bigger question. Would Ziva physically come back for the finale? Like, would Cody DePablo walk onto our screens? There was an article that came out a few years ago that I've seen people re-reference in lieu of this latest episode, where she talked about one of the reasons that she left was that she didn't like her upcoming storylines and where it looked like her character was going, and that she would maybe think of returning if they came up with a good enough storyline. And I think this has the potential to be a pretty interesting storyline, to say the least. I don't think it's impossible. I'm not her agent, nor am I her, but you know, who knows? Gibbs? What if they like brought her back in CGI? Wouldn't that be a horrifying moment of NCIS history? If she is alive, where has Ziva been living? Has she just been living in that office the whole time? Because that would be hilarious. Like, everyone thought she was like dead or in Paris or in Israel, but meanwhile she's just like down the street. I want them to do like a whole montage where they like look back at pictures from the past 2 years and they can just see like her like hiding in the background. I love this new Where's Waldo aesthetic Ziva has adopted. Does Tony know? Because there is that whole thing where they like tried to contact him, and then McGee's like, Senior says he's on his way back to Paris. From where? Is an interesting question. I called my mom after the episode. I'm like, Ziva's alive, and she's like, probably with Tony and Tali in Paris, living her life. And my mom's like, I doubt it. She's probably right. It's just like a pipe dream of mine that Ziva's happy one day. Oh God, Ziva referring to Tony and Tali as her family, just... Which is like true, like, they're her family now. But like, just like hearing it referenced that way really just, holy mother of God. And perhaps an even bigger question than all of that is she even alive? Like, did she write that note? Or is it like one of the 47 people she had in her secret cabin? Maybe it's Orly, just pretending to be Ziva's ghost. And now that I've joked about it, it's probably going to be the season finale, so glad we figured it out. And it would also be interesting if it was like a villain from their past, Trent Court. In my humble opinion, that's a little bit of a cop-out to make it from someone else. I think it should be from Ziva. But that's just my humble opinion. I really loved that the storyline was Ziva-centric, because a lot of her more recent storylines have been like Tiva storylines, or just her in relation to someone else. As much as I enjoy her relationships to other people, I love Ziva for Ziva. Like, I just don't love Tiva, and I just don't love whatever. I love just being able to focus on Ziva, and I think she is more than capable of having super interesting and meaningful and intelligent plot lines that are just focused on her and her past and her development. I also think it's interesting that her legacy has continued. I mean, you do still hear about Kate, but like, do you? I can appreciate that for better or for worse, Ziva's story arc has continued after she's left the show. Again, you just have to be careful because the soul of your character and like your character's legacy literally just like rests in the palm of your hands. I might have said this already, but I liked that the reveal was something important and meaningful, because the way they advertised it, it was like Ziva has a secret. As interesting as it would have been for them to just be like, Ziva is Jenny Shepard's half-daughter and she can speak to dolphins. Like, I liked that it was relevant to something pertaining to the character. I also don't know how you can be someone's half-daughter. Also, what I would give for a Ziva speaks to dolphin storyline. Can you imagine if she just like whipped that out on the case? Like someone drowns and Ziva's like, hello friends, got any tips? Why am I not a writer on NCIS? I think I'm gonna try and follow the rest of the season. Just when I think I'm out, they pull me back in. Speaking of being out of it, Gibbs and Sloane's ship name is apparently Slibs. So I'm glad I missed the voting on that. There was one point a little bit ago where I was like considering catching up on the show, and I just was like, let me Google the most recent promo, and it was like, Bishop's dead fiance might actually be evil? And I was like, Bishop had a boyfriend? Speaking of Bishop, I'm so curious to see how she deals with this, because I don't doubt that she can like keep a secret relatively well, but I want to see how like it weighs on her, and like, you know, when we start the next episode, is it just like completely brushed off, or do you see like a glimpse of that? Like, is she still shook? I would be. Also, I would imagine this note is going to come out at some point again, and I'm curious to see how it impacts her relationship with Gibbs, because that already seems to be in some troubled waters. I mean, I think Gibbs has like a suspicion that she's like still alive. Assuming she's still alive and then having some form of evidence she might still be alive are two very different things. Can you imagine just for like a second Ziva and Tony and Tali interacting, and like we get to see that with our own human eyeballs? I want to see more of Bishop and Ziva. It's just, they've opened this Pandora's box and now I just want more. I think in this episode alone, if that was Ziva, like they just really connected. Like they just really established a bond. And I just want to see them meet face to face, or just have some sort of like actual interaction. I just think it'd be really neat. Gosh, I just love Ziva so much. You know, and it's always so interesting to reflect on like, Ziva's obviously like a meaningful and important character to me, but like this just proves how like important and influential she is to the show. Like the second they introduce Ziva in some capacity, people start flooding back to the show. You can like see it reflected in the ratings and just on social media. Like it's not just me, like other people like her and enjoy her, and I like that. I just want to see her character again in a thoughtful, progressive to her storyline, positive light. And then there's McGee, who like was present for all of this too. So, you know, I'd love to see more of McGee doing things. I'm aware that he had like his big storyline with like his family, and he's had episodes this season, but just like this was this was not his episode, and like you could really tell as he just uncomfortably sifted through fan fiction. That was his shining moment, and as I loved it. More of that. But I believe that's all I have to say about this episode. I'm so curious to know what you guys think, what you thought of the episode. Do you think it's a possible potential finale arc? I just think the storyline has so much potential, and Ziva's character is always ripe with story that it wouldn't shock me if they chose to go that direction. I believe that's all for now. Let's just see where this roller coaster takes us. And then she looks at the desk, and there's a letter, and it says, I can't find it.